Welcome everyone to our show, Another World is Possible, sponsored by Zeitgeist New York City, a chapter of the worldwide organization, the Zeitgeist Movement. My name is Harry Kaysen. The Zeitgeist Movement is an international biosphere advocacy and human rights group focusing on educating the public about the many socio-economic harms inherent in a competitive market economy. Consequently, we propose the adoption for all of us of a new, sustainable, socio-political economy referred to as a natural law resource-based economy. Now, explaining what a resource-based economy is, why it is so important to all of us, and how it would work generally is the point of our program, Another World is Possible. But our show is an ongoing project. So we won't get to everything, but you need to look for our upcoming episodes in the future. And those episodes will be guest-based rather than a presentation as I'm doing today. Following from the show's title, Another World is Possible, it is easy to assess that we're proposing serious socio-economic change. And in this case, we are deadly serious. This is not a game, folks. Given the present state of the world, we are actually threatening our very survival, either through global warming or nuclear war. Have you noticed the fires that are going on in California? And today, the day of the taping of this show, is the 73rd anniversary of Nagasaki. So let us keep in mind that these threats to our civilization have not gone away, and we'll discuss that. Now, most of you out there have your heads buried in the New York cement, and so that is why we're here today. For example, a new study entitled The Trajectory of Earth's System in the Anthropocene, published by the National Academy of Sciences, just published, warns that self-reinforcing feedbacks could push global warming, could push the Earth system toward a planetary threshold that, if crossed, could prevent stabilization of the climate at intermediate temperature rises and cause continued warming. In other words, it's going to have so many feedback loops that we will not be able to stop the warming and we will not be able to continue to live on this planet. Now, as we move from show to show in this series, we will bring to your attention the strands of madness, as I just for one example I just gave you, that presently characterize our early 21st century. So don't miss a show and start paying attention and get your friends tuned in as well. So for now, we're going to take a little break and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Another World is Possible. Before getting into today's presentation, let's delve a bit deeper into what the Zeitgeist movement is about and the incredible vision Another World is Possible has to offer us. Fundamentally, the Zeitgeist movement is a moral and human rights movement that aims desperately at saving the human race from itself, by emphasizing the use of reason and the scientific method as much as possible, while realizing that science cannot provide perfect answers to all our problems. Consequently, the Zeitgeist movement insists that only a cooperatively based society, particularly in the arena of economics, can possibly build a good society. Only a cooperative society. This does not mean, however, that competition has to be completely eliminated from the good society. Competition in the realm of ideas, in sports, and internally as individuals, becoming all that one can be, are all exceedingly important to the good society. But competing over survival and for the opportunity to have a dignified life is remarkably counterproductive. And this program, Another World is Possible, brought to you by Zeitgeist New York City, exists to demonstrate with example after example how much better our lives would be if we humans were to learn that working together with all of its difficulties would nevertheless make our life exceptionally superior to the competitive war we live through every day. If and when we, the human race, decide to work collaboratively, we will then be in a position to eliminate war, eliminate poverty, eliminate much, if not most of the suffering that goes on this planet, and save the human race from the very consequences that emerge from the competitive, individualistic, nationalist, international system we take as normal every day. For example, we could save ourselves from the competitive enterprise presently steering us either to nuclear annihilation or to biosphere degradation, global warming, environmental destruction, and not to mention our own destruction. We could avoid these problems if we would. If we learn to cooperate and work together. And we'll talk about this. We'll have to talk about this a lot, and we will talk about this in upcoming shows. This is so important for you to see not only this presentation, but all the shows in a series of Another World is Possible. So in other words, instead of creating oblivion, we could produce a good society by ending our war of all against all. We could provide excellent education to all while expecting the best from all. After all, education is the key to to solving all our problems. In addition, we could put technology to work using robotics, renewable energy, conservation, recycling, all of these things greatly reducing our workload in the future, which, by the way, a competitive society cannot do. It can't do it. We'll discuss this more and more. We could also reduce the amount of required professional work that we would all be trained and educated to do, while remaining at the careers that we're interested in, past our obligations, remaining there as we wish. In other words, we can continue doing what we want to do if we wish, but we could also go on and do other things. We could actually end unemployment by cooperatively sharing the reduced workload, and end poverty by sharing the bounty. This gets challenging now, doesn't it? Yes, we got a lot to talk about. In fact, by working together, we are actually much more productive. We are able to get things done much quicker when we are working together. We could likewise provide health care to all and reduce high anxiety. And boy, do we have a lot of high anxiety in this society. I noticed how many pills there are being taken every day in this country. Finally, we could have equal opportunity for everyone and have everyone's needs met, as determined by the community. The community, we together determine what our needs are. Now, you are not going to get a better definition of freedom than this. Having our needs met and having equal opportunity, you won't do any better than that. Let's take a short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. Now, today's show is designed to explain why another world is so needed. Consequently, I will be sharing many thoughts with you that I hope you will find supportive of our contention that another world is possible and is desperately needed. We begin the show by pointing out that there are only two basic types of human social systems in the world, even though there are endless variations on the two types. The first type is a competitive social system, and it is characterized or dominated by competition, and cooperation is used by social members to better compete with other individuals or groups. This is the basic type of social system we have today in our so-called modern world. And this type of social system obviously shapes and characterizes human relations today. Now, the second type, which we will call a cooperative social system, is characterized or dominated by cooperation, where social members use competition to better cooperate as a whole. This is the type of social system we see much more often in smaller and more traditional societies. And this type of social system obviously shapes human relations in its time and place as well. In fact, the resulting social consequences that emerge from these two systems are enormous. And we want to draw your attention to just this. While neither the competitive or the cooperative system is more natural than the other, we should nevertheless deeply evaluate the consequential differences between the two systems. And Zeitgeist New York City argues that the consequences of the cooperative society are far superior. Nevertheless, we should keep in mind that it is easier to minimize social rules and impose competition on each other, as we do every day, than it is to find a complex set of rules, social rules, that fosters cooperation. In other words, anarchistic raw power is easier to establish, usually, than democratic justice. But what is it that we want in our world? Do we want raw power, or do we want democratic justice in this world? Now, in evaluating the competitive society, it is regularly said that its primary beneficial consequences are that it is more innovative, produces greater wealth, and promotes human freedom. Well, let's consider these claims. On the issue of innovation, it is true that the threat of starvation or abject poverty under a competitive social system can motivate human activity and thus lead to enhanced innovation. It's possible, and it happens. We humans do respond to rewards and punishments. But those who support the competitive approach to life believe that rewards and punishments are the only motivating factor for humans. So in other words, we humans would do nothing, would sit around and do nothing without rewards and punishments. But this is simply not true. Humans are driven by more than their immediate self-centered physical or biological needs. We have the drive in us to do things that interest us, things that we like doing, things that enable us to contribute to a larger purpose, things that promote justice and moral behavior. We believe in doing the right thing. Yes, we do. We believe in doing the right thing, and we don't always do the right thing. In fact, we humans have even more. We have something called curiosity, and we enjoy learning under the right conditions. Have you ever seen a healthy baby that was not curious? So we humans are naturally innovative, and we come that way right out of the box. In other words, we humans are creative, and we do things not simply because external forces of rewards and punishment, but because of our natural internal drives for greater knowledge and greater righteousness. Yes, we want justice in this world. Sit there and argue with me and tell me you don't want it. Our present competitive system actually stunts our internal drives of curiosity, and for reasons we'll discuss below. And for the great majority of us, this competitive society is a crime against humanity. On the issue of the competitive society producing greater wealth, well, let's think about that. Let's look at that. Research has demonstrated that as countries get richer, further increases in average living standards do less and less for health and for happiness. Both health and happiness do rise in the early stages of economic growth, but then they level off. They level off. In a study done with statistics from the early 2000s, happiness and life expectancy in a large number of randomly selected countries flattened off at around 25,000 GDP per capita. In other words, for a family of 2, that would be 50,000. A family of 3, that'd be 75,000. And a family of 4, 100,000. Therefore, as nations improve their GNP per capita, these further rises in average income do less and less for us in terms of happiness and life expectancy. For example, it is diseases of poverty which first decline as countries start to get richer. As they get richer and they solve problems of tuberculosis, cholera, and measles, people definitely get happier and healthier. So, what then is the point in getting rich? What is the point? Well, the point is, for most people, is to gain, for those who do find it necessary to get rich, to gain and hold power over others. It is not about freeing the human race, as is argued by those who promote the competitive society. Competition is the weapon of the strong and the aggressive, and almost never a tool of freedom. In fact, competition over survival is the main way that our natural drive for greater knowledge and autonomy is driven out of us. You see, competition structurally creates a few winners and a great majority of people left behind. And being left behind in a competitive system, more often than not, destroys self-image and self-esteem. And there's nothing greater than self-image and self-esteem to keep people going. It also structurally establishes inequality. Competition structurally establishes inequality of opportunity, which only makes winning for those who fall behind that much harder going forward. Competition is the problem, folks. Ironically, some would argue that wealth provides security. But I ask you, what country feels secure in this world today, considering the continuing and growing military arsenals that are all around us? And no one beats the United States when it comes to military arsenals. And I ask you, why are gated communities so prevalent? And policing so sought after by so many communities these days. In fact, research has shown that within societies, health and social problems remain strongly associated with levels of income inequality. You reduce inequality, and we reduce social anxiety, and we increase security. bombs and planes and more bombs will not bring you security or peace. It is the inequality created by competition over survival that tears societies apart. So, paradoxically, in a competitive social system, there is usually very little attention given to the wealth inequality that is produced by this system, while virtual total attention and praise is given to the endless growth of wealth the system produces. But again, we create more and more wealth. For what purpose? Especially considering how unequally the wealth is distributed. Logically, the wealth is actually created by the many, but it is captured by the few. And for what purpose? To control the many that don't have any wealth. Wealth is not about freedom. It's about unfreedom for the majority of the people of this country, of the United States, and in this world. In fact, research has shown that inequalities actually reduce the well-being of individuals as well as entire countries. Research shows this. So inequality weakens our community life. This is what's missing, folks. Community is what's missing. So inequality weakens community life. It reduces trust and it increases violence. It doesn't get rid of violence. Very few of us actually respect. Now get this, okay? Very few of us actually respect those of us whom we do not see as our equal. We need much greater equality in this world. As an example, how do we treat poor teenage girls who get pregnant? Well, as it turns out, they do get pregnant at a higher rate in more unequal countries and in more unequal U.S. states. Criticizing them and degrading them does not help them. Now look, homicide rates are also more common in unequal countries and in more unequal U.S. states. So we have more pregnancy rates, more homicide, more people imprisoned in more unequal countries and in more unequal states. In fact, mental health and social problems increase with higher levels of inequality. This is the problem we're facing, folks. It is not that we're not rich enough. Let's be real here. Competition in the realm of ideas and sports is absolutely necessary. But in the arena of survival, it promotes greed, bullying, crime, war, poverty, monopoly, domination, wastefulness, environmental degradation, artificial scarcity, and artificial democracy. Competition, therefore, creates the very inequalities that foster these negative consequences. So on balance, a competitive social system is overwhelmingly a negative for the vast majority of the people of the world. Incredibly interesting is the fact that the social and health problems of rich developed countries are not caused by our not being rich enough, but by the grand scale of material differences that exist between people and within society. In other words, inequality. What matters is where we stand in relation to each other in our society. And when we stand together, we have the opportunity for peace and justice and righteousness. But as long as we don't want that, as long as we think driving and creating feelings of superiority and inferiority over others, this is taking us down the road to destruction. How we think others perceive of us is absolutely, extremely important. And material inequality hurts our perception of those with less. So low social status, a lack of friends, and stress in early life have all been shown in our many well-controlled studies to be seriously detrimental to health and longevity. Research has also shown that the heightening competition between individuals and groups, this is incredible, folks, the heightening competition between groups in an effort to reduce their personal feelings and their specific conditions of inequality actually increases anxiety. In other words, the more we strive to improve our own status in relation to others, others are obliged to do the same, causing even more competition and more social anxiety. Now, I'm not suggesting that we need to return to the Stone Age, because we do not. Our productivity is incredible. We actually have plenty to go around, and productivity will only get better. But the hoarding of money and financial assets by the few creates scarcity and poverty for the many. We could learn from our very early forebears that sharing and giving and showing concern for others is the best way to find security. The real security, not this fake security where you have bombs hanging over your heads and thinking that hanging bombs over other people's heads is going to make you secure. So as we have said, competition actually creates a structure of winners and losers and social mobility that cannot undo this horrible structure that competition creates. For example, a child born in the top quintile, that's the top 20% of society, a child born in the top quintile has a 39% chance of ending up in that same top quintile and a 62% chance of ending up in one of the two top quintiles, while a child born in the bottom quintile has a 6% chance of ending up in the top quintile and a 42% chance that she or he will end up in their original bottom quintile. A 42% chance being in their bottom quintile. What is actually quite incredible is the fact that businesses, as well as educational institutions, are actually based internally on the cooperative model, since it is recognized that cooperation actually enhances learning and success. In education, we do not pit students against each other. We pit individuals against themselves and expect individuals to do their best. A competitive winner-take-all society is what we have today. So let me expand on the actual reality of our lives and then move on to the supposed freedom that the competitive social system is said to provide. From 1977 to 2007, a 30-year period, 60% of the United States national income went to the top 1%. The average income of the bottom 90% of Americans in 2012 was actually lower than it was in 1967. The wealthiest 2% in the world holds more than 50% of all the world's wealth. And the top 10% holds 85% of the world's wealth. 39 of the 229 nations in the world consume more than 80% of all the world's wealth, or hold all the world's wealth. The richest 10% of Americans own 90% of America's wealth. The richest 1% of Americans own 40% of America's wealth. 1% of Americans have more wealth than the bottom 95% of Americans. The richest 10% of Americans own 81% of America's corporate stocks. The richest 5% of Americans own 70% of America's corporate stocks. The richest 1% owns 38% of America's corporate stocks. The richest 20% of Americans take in 59% of America's income, leaving 41% of America's income for the bottom 80%. The average corporate employee must work a month to earn what the average corporate CEO earns in 1 hour. 85% to 90% of Americans work for the other 10 to 15%. Folks, this is not freedom. This is another form of servitude. We're returning to the Middle Ages of serfdom. Now, child poverty rates in Detroit, 59%. 59% of the children who live in Detroit live in poverty. And in Cleveland, it's 54%, Fresno, California, 48%, Memphis, 46%, Miami, 44%. Folks, that's how our children are living in the large cities of our great country. 17 million children and 50 million adults are food insecure. And what that means is that they don't know where their next meal that they don't know that their next meal will actually be tomorrow. Of all campaign spending between labor unions and corporations in 2011, 2012, labor unions spent 6%. This is on campaign contributions. Labor unions spent 6%. And corporations spent 94%. You know who owns this government of ours. You know who runs our country. 1.5 million children die each year in the world from not receiving what are inexpensive, preventable treatments, okay? 8 people own more wealth in this world than the bottom 3.5 billion of us. 12% of the world's population consumes 62% of the world's resources. Therefore, it is not surprising when we learn that our first Supreme Court Justice, John Jay, we got a college named after John Jay. What did he say? He said that the people who own the country ought to run the country. And we just saw that that's what's happening. Likewise, John Adams, the second president of the United States, pointed out the balance of power in society accompanies the balance of property. In other words, who owns what? Who owns the property of society runs the society. In fact, democracy and the inequality that the competitive society creates are actually incompatible. They're actually incompatible. Aristotle, and both Aristotle and de Tocqueville contended in their times that there is a close relationship between economic equality and political democracy, a very close relationship. You cannot have serious inequality and have democracy. Now, it is said that the poor are lazy, and indeed, 60% of Americans only have 4% of America's wealth, and 90% of Americans only have 10% of America's wealth. But are you telling me that 60 to 90% of Americans are truly this lazy? No. Such charges are simply nothing more than slander against the American people and against the people of the world. I know because I came from there. I came from a poor background, and I know better. And those of you who come from a poor background, you know better. So can there be any doubt that on balance, cooperation will be far more productive, equitable, and life-affirming than competition? So let's think about what we could do. And I want to put forward a really bold and very responsible, much more responsible than what we're getting today from the people who run this world, is a cooperatively based society, a system that would improve everyone's life, even the rich. You know what? In fact, to be rich and be powerful, this only makes their life and their security and their freedom of movement even more tenuous. Indeed, the rich have to worry about who? Other rich, as well as the poor. You have to look out for both of us. So what should we do? Well, we have to build a world based on cooperation rather than on competitive survival. In the 18th century, Jean-Jacques Rousseau was already pointing out, get this, a European Union would be that it would be possible and would be much more beneficial for Europeans if they rationally followed their true interests. What was Rousseau saying? He was saying that if the European people would stop and think about what they're doing, come together, build a common Europe, build a European Union, right? Build a European Union, then they would be so much better off. That's what they're trying to do now. And I know they're having trouble, the European Union, but Europe is far better off united. And the message is, we have to unite the world. We have to unite the whole world. And competition for survival will not get us there. Now look, Rousseau argues that competition is a state of mind, or actually cooperation. He argues that cooperation is a state of mind, an emotional faith and commitment to all, where a common me and a common we, a common us exists. Significantly, the system we have, competitive individualism, is also a state of mind, which means we have the option to choose between the two very different paths. The alternative cooperative path, being suggested by Zeitgeist, would begin by guaranteeing to ourselves, from ourselves, all our basic needs without a price tag. Food, clothing, health care, education, transportation, housing, and on, without a price tag. We work together. We work together. Rather than spending half our tax dollars on forcibly establishing our control over other people's resources through war, and that's what we're doing, folks. And in this way, gaining the competitive edge, we instead cooperatively work together and avoid destroying through war the very resources we need for human survival. And we are actually doing this. The only way to end the endless war of all against all is for all of us to come together and generously guarantee everyone their security and their equal access to the Earth's resources. There is no other answer. We come together or we go down together. And if you care about justice in this world, then acceptance of the world as it is has to be turned 180 degrees. At the same time that we start working together, we can then put the machines and the technology that we have to work and dramatically, as we said earlier, reduce our workload. We could reduce our workload to 1 or 2 days a week. We could reduce our lifetime work levels to 15 years or even less. We have all been talking about this since the 1950s. Since the 1950s we've been talking. And what's happened? What has actually happened? Instead, it's ramping up and ramping up. But in the competitive world of all against all, the world we presently live in, these improvements in our lives are not possible. It's not possible. We cannot, in this competitive world, share the wealth and move forward and move forward in a good way. It's just not possible. It's not possible. And we will discuss this in greater detail in issue after issue, or program after program. Furthermore, we also make sure, this is something we've got to do. We've got to make sure that every child is not left behind educationally. That if we were to do this, then as adults, we would all be well prepared to contribute economically at high levels, which would actually make reducing our workload even more possible. Having most of the workforce in the world, half the world's workforce is not, half the world's people are not prepared. They're underprepared to economically contribute. And this is incredibly inefficient. This is extremely counterproductive. So we could also promote efficiency through recycling and conservation. You can't do this in the competitive system. We can't promote efficiency through recycling, conservation, renewables, and promote sustainable social and environmental policies. We can't do it because of the private interest that gets in the way. The large corporations are stopping us from moving to solar and wind and geothermal energy that we desperately need to get. They're stopping us, and we're at the brink already, and we've been talking about this since 1970. Oh my God. So we could also reject the extremely wasteful policy of planned obsolescence. Planned obsolescence. Can you believe that we actually wastefully build things so that they don't last, so that we can sell more products? You know, we could get on to clean, free energy and solar and wind and geothermal and build a highly intricate network of renewable backup systems. We also then we have to allow our local communities to have much greater control over their lives, much greater cultural diversity at the local level, and this would need to work cooperatively, so that other localities can produce and distribute those items that a particular locality can't produce for themselves. But we work together. Work would be done through cooperatives at the local level, where they have much greater control. We have to spend a lot more time on this. I'm just brushing over this part, because we're going to, in a follow-up show, in our next shows, we are going to be showing or discussing much more how we allow the economy to work with the locals having much more say. And I think everyone would be much happier to have much greater local control over their lives. And so local cooperatives would maintain a high degree of local independence. And so these cooperatives would produce with wider community in mind, All necessary socioeconomic decision-making, indeed, would actually be done through open source computing, where any individual who wishes to participate is, allowed to do so and is fully informed. They know what the information is. You know, this system would free up the human race for the first time in probably 100,000 years. And we have the technology, the capability to do these things. At present, we're only lacking the political will. So would people be willing to give a couple days out of the week or a few years out of their life in order to be free? Something a competitive society can never achieve? I think so. Now there is some real motivation for you. And I ask you, is freedom actually a reward or a right? After all, once we have done our minimum work requirements, both skilled and unskilled, we are able to do as we wish and even go into other areas of research, entertainment, healthcare, engineering, if that's what we wanted to do. But best of all, we continue to pursue our interests from a position of virtual self-autonomy. We could actually simply retire if we wanted to. So Zeitgeist actually has faith in the vast majority of the human race and does not denigrate the human race as so many of those who promote competition do. And Zeitgeist believes that when people are given the opportunity to freely pursue their passions, they will generate a highly cooperative world where competition is used to promote a better world, a much better world, a cooperative world. So people will not ask, and I get this all the time, people will ask me, they'll take everything, People will not ask for infinite supplies of everything, since this is another world and another state of mind. We would no longer have to ask if we could afford something. We would only ask, do we have the resources? And if we do not, then we pursue sustainable substitutes or sustainable increases in supply. We have the technology and the knowledge to create the cooperative world. But will we act upon it before either global warming or nuclear war, the consequences of competition over survival, actually ends the human experiment? We have a choice to make. So the competitive society is innovative and produces significant wealth. But as we have shown you, the innovation and wealth that it produces does not produce human freedom. It actually entraps us in servitude. Make your choice wisely. Another world is possible if you choose well. Okay, folks, that's it for the show today. Hope that we have provided you with some provocative thinking, some truly progressive thinking, and we would love to hear from you. We'll have up on the screen the email where you can contact us. And if you think that you've got a better way, because working together is really our only hope. Yes, again, we need to talk about how we might use competition, but for the purposes of advancing humankind. Think about talking to your friends. Think about what we said. Think about how you are convinced that this can't happen. And then think about the possibilities of it happening. Because it's only when you and your brothers and your sisters start believing that we have a chance at building a world that we're not going to destroy, that we are actually going to improve, not destroy. This is when we will make it happen. When we have, as we said, this is a state of mind. And if you can't get out of the state of mind that we're in today, then we're all going down together. So let's think about another way. Get in touch with us. Don't miss a show, because we're going to go into a lot more detail into all these areas that you and everyone has doubts about. So we'll see you next time, and don't miss the show. Have a good day.